A question that's really been on my mind lately is how do some rackets seem to generate more spin than others? It's like on a daily basis we're completely bombarded by marketing by these big companies, Babolat with their Arrow, Head and the Extreme, Dunlop and the SX, Yonex and the V-Core, and they're saying these rackets are designed for spin. But what does that really mean? Well, a few of the things that you'll often come across are wider string spacing, wider grommets to help the strings move a little bit more, but I think a lot of that is just complete made up marketing stuff that may not always actually translate to more spin on the court. So today I want to talk about some very objective factors that are scientifically backed to produce more spin and some ideas that have good research behind them. But I also want to talk about a little bit more of a subjective perspective on the basis that everyone's tennis game is a little bit different. Alright, so for the objective portion of this video, we're going for more of a tight headshot presentation, so I look superior, like I know a lot of stuff. So one thing that I want to tackle right off the bat is spin potential on a racket. This is a racket's potential to create spin, and in different people's game, it may not always yield more spin if that player can't extract the racket's full potential. So one thing that you can think of is, in theory, increasing swing weight is going to increase the spin potential of a racket. But if you think about your grandma, adding some lead tape to her racket might not actually help her produce spin if she loses a ton of racket head speed as a result of the increased weight. So with that in mind, here are some big ticket items that are going to help increase the spin potential. The first is swing weight. That is, in my opinion, the number one piece to unlocking spin. If you look at big spin marketing rackets like the Steam 99S that came out almost 10 years ago, that had a 340 strung swing weight. That is massive, especially for a racket that's coming in the low 300 grams. We're definitely not seeing anything close to that right now, even from those spin lines like the V-Core or the Arrow. The next concept that I want to discuss is spin window. Ask any coach and they're really likely to tell you that the technique is the number one driver of spin. The more vertical your swing path and the higher racket head speed you can deliver to that ball, the better spin you're going to generate. So if we can widen the spin window, we can increase spin. But what is the spin window? Well, it has to do with the angle of attack. A couple factors that are going to contribute to having a wider spin window are longer crosses, so a wider head. Think like the Gravity series or a Blade 104, they're quite wide. Those have wide spin windows. The other thing is the beam width. If you have a thick beam, that is more likely to catch the ball as you swing vertically up to the racket, whereas a thin beam is less likely to be in the way, so you won't shank the ball and can take a very steep angle of attack. The next is stiffness. Anytime you have a stiffer racket, you're going to be able to return more energy to the ball because that energy isn't being dissipated into the flexing of the racket. More energy means more power, but it can also mean more spin, especially if you have that spin-oriented swing path. If you want to see a lot of the science that backs these, I recommend going to Tennis Warehouse University. They have like a dedicated TW professor and he does great research. But even he admits that it is really hard to understand the causality when it comes to spin because there are so many variables that you have to account for. String tension, how long it's been since the racket is strung, the type of ball you're using, atmospheric conditions. You have to keep the swing consistent, but on the other hand, a human is not going to have a consistent swing. Depending on what racket they're going to use, their swing is going to change drastically, and I think that is where the subjectivity really comes into this discussion. Alright, so now that we're talking about subjective items, we're going to go with a more intimate camera angle. I'll even move this mic nice and close so it sounds like we're pillow talking. But anyway, so when it comes to tennis, a lot of us will have very different techniques. Just go down to a public park and everyone seems to be swinging the racket a little bit differently. Now, some of this is just based on your physical attributes. Are you tall? Are you short? How athletic are you? Do you have good hand-eye coordination? But also in the developmental stage, it depends on what kind of coaching you had. So with that in mind, we have to think about how those three factors I discussed earlier are going to impact your swing. So when you increase the swing weight, given the same amount of input effort, you're probably going to slow down your swing speed. But if you're strong enough to keep your swing speed up or even hold it constant, you are going to get more spin. And that's one of the reasons I recommend adding as much lead tape as you can feel comfortable swinging over the amount of time that you hit, because you're going to get the most out of your racket that way. The next thing we talked about was the spin window. So when we open up that spin window, we can increase our angle of attack, leading to more spin. But on the other hand, because you're taking a more vertical swing path, you might start dropping the ball a little bit shorter in the court. Maybe you're not getting the same amount of power. So when you swing vertically, if you want to keep your ball speed up, you're going to have to start swinging harder. So we can't be infinitely increasing the spin window and expect an infinitely large increase in spin production, because so much of spin relies on what you're able to generate. The last thing is stiffness, and stiffness is a little bit more straightforward because it's not going to have that same kind of impact on your swing. Regardless of how stiff the racket is, it's not going to change how it feels as you're swinging it. That said, we all have an upper limit in terms of stiffness. The upper limit in the market seems to be 74, 72 RA unstrung. A lot of people are scared to even go that high due to arm issues. So once again, we're probably not just looking for the stiffest racket possible due to medical repercussions, essentially. So there are a few things that I still haven't talked about. Remember those marketing ideas that I brought up earlier, like the string pattern and the size of the grommets? Well, they're not all they're cracked up to be. Having a more open string pattern does seem to decrease friction in the string bed, leading to more string movement, which should in theory create more spin, especially if you're experiencing that snapback sensation that we get with polyester or gut strings. On the other hand, it also increases launch angle quite a bit, which may feel like you can't swing as vertically as previously stated. A lot of people, myself included, when they play with really open string pattern rackets like any of Wilson's spin lines, those with the S designation, or even like a Babolat Pure Arrow or a Pure Strike 16x19, it's harder to control that launch angle, and you're always worried that the ball is going to fly on you. And if that happens, then you get into this psychological space where you just feel like you're going to hit it out if you use full swing, and then you slow down your swing speed, and then your spin dies, and then your ball speed dies, and all of a sudden you're on the back foot and losing every single point to this guy that you just met in the park 5 minutes ago. That is not where you want to be. When it comes to the size of the grommets, it's pretty hard for me to believe this one, because if you look at where the strings actually move, they hardly ever move that close to the grommets. Just look at this picture, and it is just an obvious case that you're not going to see increased string movement because the grommet is a little bit wider than it was before. Alright, so the last thing I want to talk about is the relationship between spin and twist weight. So according to this study on twist weight done at Tennis Warehouse University by the TW professor, you can see that a normal racket is going to produce a little bit more spin if you hit the ball lower in the hoop, medium spin if you hit it in the center, and less spin if you hit the ball high up on the frame. When the TW professor adds 100 grams of weight at 3 and 9 each, that spin production changes. Suddenly now we're getting the most spin from the highest side of the racket. But is this something that we can take into account? If we add lead tape to our rackets, does that mean suddenly we need to hit the ball higher up on the string bed? Well, probably not. Just look at this other example where the TW professor moves those weights to 10 and 2 o'clock. Suddenly, the lowest position is creating the most spin again. Now, one thing that this study doesn't take into account is how your swing path might change as a result of a high twist weight. Now, some people have suggested that something about twist weight can help or hinder this motion on the racket. They believe that there is some sort of intentional rubbing over the top side of the ball that helps create spin like that. Now, what I don't like about this is they're positing that it's not the steepness of the angle of attack that creates this spin, but it's like you could even swing straight forward and rub over top of the ball to create spin. There are not enough ways for me to explain how wrong that is. If you try to rub over top of the ball with your racket, you will shank it horribly and probably hit it straight into the ground. No professional tennis player is intentionally doing this like petting the dog motion on contact. So what's actually happening here is the player is intentionally catching the ball low in the string bed. They're going for that maximum spin placement on their string bed. After the ball leaves the string bed, as a result of the impact, the racket twists in the hand because it doesn't have an insanely high twist weight with hundreds of grams attached to 3 and 9 with literal brass weights. So for the rec player, increasing or decreasing twist weight shouldn't be thought of something that increases or decreases the spin potential of an actual racket. What I think is a much more important thing to think about is how that twist weight is going to affect your swing. So when you add more weight at 3 and 9 o'clock, it's going to decrease the maneuverability of that racket. You're going to find it a little bit harder to adjust the angle of the racket face as you approach the ball for a big swing, and that is especially important when you're going for a more vertical swing path to deliver more and more topspin. In my game, I certainly notice that I have a hard time producing a lot of topspin with rackets with higher twist weights. That's something I really spoke about in my Pure Aero VS review. Once I got my swing weight up to 340, satisfying my needs for power, stability, I suddenly lost a lot of maneuverability, which shouldn't really happen considering that the static weight on the Extreme Tour and the Pure Aero VS are the same, which leads the final culprit being the twist weight. I found the racket harder to maneuver due to that high twist weight, and my racket head speed suffered, especially going in that vertical axis towards the ball. So to me, the final lesson when it comes to spin production and your tennis racket is not necessarily about what theoretically is going to be the most spin friendly, because that's just going to be like an oversized grandma racket with like a dumbbell attached to 12 o'clock. That theoretically should produce a a lot of topspin, but it's probably not right for your game. It's not really to say only good players are going to extract that full spin potential from their racket. It's more about finding that racket that is going to extract the spin potential from your game.